Episode 1. The Door That Was Never Blessed. There's a hallway in the convent that ends without reason. It stretches far beyond the others, long and narrow, paved with colder stone, and lit by a single candle that never quite stays lit. At the end of it stands a wooden door darker than the rest, with no number, no plaque, and no cross above the frame. Every other door in St. Aradia's convent bears a crucifix, anointed in oil, blessed yearly by the bishop, except this one, not because they forgot, because they were told never to bless it. Sister Thérèse had only been at the convent for weeks. A quiet girl of 19, asked the curious for vows not yet taken. She prayed more than required, worked longer than asked, and kept her questions to herself. All but one. What's at the end of the east hallway? That door without the cross. The older sisters grew silent at the mention. One made the sign of the cross without realizing it. Another left the room entirely. It was Sister Agnes who finally answered, her voice brittle with age and warning. It's not a door, child, it's a reminder. And some reminders were never meant to be opened. But that night, Thérèse couldn't sleep. The candle outside the door was flickering again, though no one touched the corridor. Shadows stretched strangely on the stone, curving where they should have broken. She felt drawn to it not out of rebellion, not even curiosity, but a kind of recognition, as if her soul had seen that door before it had bones. When she reached it, her hand trembled before touching the knob. It was ice, not cold, dead. She leaned in close. No sound, until a breath from the other side. Not hers, not echo. A breath that didn't belong in a room, sealed for 147 years. She staggered back, heartbeat shaking, rosary clenched so tightly the beads left bruises in her palm. She whispered a prayer, "Our Father who art in heaven," but on the second line, the candle went out, and the words caught in her throat, as if something had taken them from the air mid-sentence. The next morning, she told no one, but something had changed. The walls felt closer, the chapel lights dimmer, and the crucifix in her room polished brass. Henning, since she arrived, had turned a shade darker overnight, just slightly, almost invisible, but she noticed, because it was the same shade as the door. Episode 2. When the candle refused to burn. It was the only hallway where light didn't linger. The other corridors of St. Aradia's convent bathed in a soft, golden warmth morning sun through stained glass, or the low orange of candlelight dancing over stone. But the eastern hall, where the forbidden door stood waiting, swallowed light like breath into a grave. And when Sister Thérèse returned to it, she brought fire. This time, not just the candle at the end. She brought 5, freshly blessed, new wax, white as purity. She would test the darkness. She thought she would see what resisted it. She placed the first candle on the floor in front of the door, struck a match, held the flame steady. It lit briefly. A soft glow flickered against the wooden frame, and then snuffed itself out. No breeze, no movement, just the sudden absence of fire. She lit it again. It died again. By the third time, her hand began to shake. By the fifth, the wick refused even to catch. Sister Thérèse knelt, heart pounding. "What are you hiding?" she whispered to the door. No response, just silence so dense it pressed against her skin. She pulled her rosary from her waist, gripped it like a weapon, and spoke aloud, "In nomen Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti." The hallway answered, not with words, but with heat. The stone beneath her knees pulsed not warm, but feverish, as if something ancient had stirred beneath the floor, awakened by the scent of oil, the echo of Latin. And then, behind her, a sound, soft, fragile, familiar, footsteps. She turned sharply. No one, but a shadow moved across the wall, too tall for any nun, too slow to be real. She stood and backed away, breath catching in her throat. As she did, she saw it. The candle, the one she had placed first, was now burning. But the flame wasn't orange. It was blue, cold, flickering upward, not vertically, but toward the ceiling, like it was trying to return to something it once belonged to. And inside that flame, for just a second, a face, a woman, eyes wide, mouth stitched shut, kneeling in the very room behind the door. Thérèse stumbled, nearly falling as her vision blurred. When she looked again, the flame was gone. The candle, untouched, still white, still new, but the wick was burned. and carved into the wax was a single word, written in a language she didn't know, but somehow understood. Return. She fled the hallway. She didn't look back. But that night, in the chapel, when all the sisters had gone to bed, she lit a candle before the statue of Saint Michael. It sparked instantly, burned perfectly, but the flame was blue. Episode 3. The Saint Who Refused to Face the Room. They said Saint Cecilia had never moved. The statue had stood in the same alcove of Saint Aradia's convent for over 100 years, carved from Carrara marble, eyes turned gently heavenward, fingers flouncing mid-harp, a symbol of silence and music, of purity and praise. But on the third morning, after Thérèse lit the blue flame, Saint Cecilia's face was turned toward the east hallway, not toward the chapel, not toward heaven, toward that door. At first, Sister Agnes blamed the cleaning staff, then the groundskeeper, but no one admitted touching it, and no one could have. The statue was too heavy to move without tools, and too holy to touch without reason. Still, there she stood, neck angled unnaturally, chin slightly dipped, eyes no longer serene, but strained, looking not at the door, but as if she was listening for something coming from behind it. That night, they sat alone in the chapel, pretending to pray, but her eyes kept drifting toward the side aisle where Saint Cecilia waited in unnatural stillness. The candle she'd lit earlier beside the statue had burned down faster than it should. The flame twisted not upward, but outward, toward the door again, as if all fire, all focus, all holiness was being pulled. She approached the statue. Close now, she noticed something she hadn't before, a crack running from the corner of Saint Cecilia's mouth to her left cheek, like the marble had strained to speak, like it had once tried to cry out and failed. "What are you looking at?" Thérèse whispered. No answer. Of course not. But when she turned to walk away, she felt something cold against her wrist. Not air, not stone, breath. She spun back, nothing. Yet the candle beside the statue flared suddenly. The wax bubbled, and within its flicker, for the briefest second, the harp in Saint Cecilia's hands appeared, warped. The strings pulled taut in strange directions, not musical anymore, restraining, binding. The next morning, the statue had moved again. Now she faced the wall, fully turned away from the east hall, from the door, hand still on the harp, but her eyes had cracked open. They had been sculpted shut, always, but now they were open. Sister Agnes wept when she saw it. She knelt before the statue, trembling, and whispered, "She's turning away, because even the saints know what's in the room was never meant to be prayed over." And that night, all the candles in the east hallway lit themselves, each flame blue, each wick hissing softly, like breath, like whispers, like a hymn coming from a mouth not yet born. Episode 4. The Sound of a Prayer Being Eaten. The first time Sister Thérèse tried praying near the door, she felt the words die in her throat, not stumble, not falter, but died like birds falling mid-flight, wings snapped by an invisible hand. She had spoken aloud only for words, in the name of, then silence, but not the kind that follows reverence. No, this silence was hungry. She knelt there in the hallway again tonight. 3 blue candles lined the floor, burning steadily now, their flames still drawn toward the door like compass needles to a forgotten north. The air smelled like burnt incense and something metallic, not blood, exactly, but memory with a taste. She clutched her rosary tight. "Our Father, who art in nothing." The moment she reached the divine, the air twitched. The words were taken, not erased, consumed. She could hear it, a wet, slithering crunch, like pages torn and chewed by something without teeth. A sound that didn't echo, but swallowed echo. She tried again, this time, silently, in her heart, but her thoughts scattered, like the prayer couldn't find itself inside her anymore. "Hallowed be thee." No, the words broke apart in her mind, syllables twisting, shifting backward, turning into noise that felt wrong, as if her faith was being unthreaded by invisible hands. And then she heard it, a voice, on the other side of the door, not loud, not deep, but fragile, like the last breath of someone who had long forgotten how to speak. A woman's voice, praying, but not to God, to something else. The cadence was familiar, but not the content. It sounded like a prayer made of shadows, the kind of plea that burns the soul it leaves from. Sister Thérèse leaned closer, and the voice whispered her name. Thérèse. She bolted upright, eyes wide, backing down the hallway, nearly tripping over the last candle. The flame turned black for just a moment, and in that blackness, she saw an image. An nun, mouth sewn shut, kneeling in a room with no windows, her hands clasped not in prayer, but in binding, and something just behind her, not a demon, worse, a listener, back in her cell that night. Sister Thérèse tried to write down the Lord's Prayer. Her hand wouldn't move. The pen scraped paper, but no ink came out. She checked the tip, it was fine. The inkpot full. She tried to say the words again. Nothing. Her voice was gone, not hoarse, not damaged, just missing. And when she looked in her mirror, her mouth was moving, but she wasn't the one moving it. Episode 5. The walls were never meant to hold it. The first crack appeared at dawn. It split the stone just above the forbidden door, a hairline fracture in ancient rock, so thin it could have been mistaken for a trick of the morning light. But it wasn't light that caused it. It was pressure, not from the outside. From within, Sister Agnes noticed it during her morning sweep. She paused, broom trembling in her hand, breath catching in her chest like a child caught remembering something they weren't meant to know. The crack pulsed, only once, as if breathing. She turned away. She didn't report it, but by noon, there were 3 more. Sister Thérèse spent most of that day in silence, not by choice. Her voice had not returned since the night her prayer was eaten. She had tried everything, salt water, holy water, even confession whispered into her own pillow, but the words inside her seemed to evaporate the moment they reached her tongue. Yet still, something inside her wanted to speak, not to others, to it. That evening, she returned to the hallway, alone. The cracks had spread like veins across the stone wall, thin, black lines curving in impossible symmetry, forming something that looked almost like letters, not written, but grown. She touched one gently. It was warm, and then it moved, only slightly, but enough that she knew these weren't just fractures. They were sentences, blooming through the rock like vines under skin. She leaned close, and what she saw made her knees buckle. The cracks weren't random. They were forming a prayer one she had never read before, but instantly understood, not with her mind, with her memory. A prayer meant to keep something in, not keep us out. She ran her finger along a curve in the stone, and instantly her vision blurred. She was not in the convent anymore. She was standing in a room filled with white-veiled figures, all kneeling toward the center. A woman, eyes wide, sewn mouth bleeding, hands pressed to the floor. Around her, the walls pulsed and screamed, not in sound, but in memory. And on every wall, words carved in blood. Do not bless this room. Do not name what listens. Thérèse gasped and woke up back in the hallway, on her hands and knees, bleeding from her fingertips where the cracks had cut her. She looked up. The door was weeping. From its edges, a dark, slow liquid leaked out. Not water, not oil, something thicker, black sap with the stench of wet stone and forgotten sanctuaries. And in the center of the door, where the wood had once been solid, a knot had formed, round, swollen, beating like a heart. The walls weren't holding something in anymore. They were preparing to release it. Episode 6. The mirror that reflected nothing holy. It had been hidden behind layers of linen and dust in the convent's oldest storage chamber, a narrow, locked room filled with broken pews, faded hymnals, and statues that no one dared polish anymore. Sister Thérèse hadn't meant to find it, but when the cracks in the hallway grew darker, and the knot in the door began to pulse like it had veins, she started looking for something older than the others would admit. She found it under a discarded crucifix, wrapped in yellow cloth that smelled like candle ash and mildew. A mirror, framed in tarnished gold, heavy, cold, and still humming with something that wasn't light. The strange thing, it was completely clean. No dust, no web, no corrosion on the glass, as if it had been watching all along beneath its wrappings, beneath time, waiting for someone willing to see. She dragged it into the hallway outside the forbidden door, set it upright, lit a candle beside it, watched the flames stretch long and sharp. Then she stepped in front of it. Slowly, her reflection looked normal at first. Same white habit, same trembling fingers, same bruises on her knuckles from where the prayer had been taken from her mouth. But something was wrong. She blinked. Her reflection didn't. She moved her right hand. Her reflection moved the left. It was behind, not beside, and behind her, something else. A figure, kneeling, draped in black, with a veil that twitched like it was breathing, hands clasped in front of it, not in prayer but in silence. Thérèse turned around, nothing. The hallway behind her was empty. She turned back to the mirror. The figure was still there, still kneeling, still waiting. She leaned closer. The candle beside her flickered blue, and for the briefest moment, the reflection shifted and she wasn't looking at herself anymore. She was looking through herself. A chapel, collapsed, roofless, filled with rusted candelabras and crumbling icons. At the center, a black altar. No cross, no chalice, only a mirror, cracked down the middle, and standing in front of it, but older, hollow-eyed, mouth sewn shut with red thread, and around her neck, instead of a rosary, a single word carved into skin, witness. She stumbled back, knocking the candle over. The mirror tipped, hit the stone floor, but didn't break. Instead, it spoke, not in words, not aloud, but inside her. You see it now, because it remembers you, because it's almost time. The next morning, Sister Agnes entered the hallway and found Thérèse staring into the mirror again. But the mirror was turned toward the wall, and her eyes weren't reflecting anything. Episode 7. When angels touched the roof and turned away. He was just a child when he saw it. 7 years old, maybe 8. A quiet orphan boy named Julian, brought to St. Aurelius by nuns, who believed silence was the first form of holiness. He rarely spoke, but on the morning of the feast of St. Michael, he broke that silence. I saw the sky touch the roof last night, he whispered, but it stopped right above the room with no cross. They dismissed it as childish wonder. Too much incense, too much candlelight, but Sister Agnes took him aside anyway. She asked him what he meant by the sky touching the roof. Julian only blinked. The angels came down. There were fire and gold and something colder than ice. They touched the roof, but they didn't go in. Sister Thérèse heard the story days later, passed down like a nervous riddle from one nun to another. But when she asked Julian to repeat it, he wouldn't speak. He just handed her a piece of paper. On it, in shaky pencil lines, was a child's drawing, a chapel beneath a blackened sky, figures of light descending like swords, and in the middle, the convent, but only one room drawn in detail. Thick walls, no windows, and a crack in the roof, shaped like an eye. That night, Thérèse climbed onto the roof. She had never dared before, but now she needed to see it from above. She needed to see what had made even angels turn away. The wind up there was unnaturally still. The stone tiles colder than they should have been, not from weather, but from something beneath. She reached the far end where the forbidden room Saturday below. And there, in the center of the roof, she found it. A mark, not a crack, not a break, a burned circular swooth, blackened like a branding. No soot, no scorch, just silence etched into stone. When she touched it, the wind shifted, and for a split second, she heard wings, not flapping, withdrawing. She fell to her knees, and a whisper rose from the tiles. They tried once. They looked in, and even they were not clean enough. Back in her cell, shaken and sleepless, Thérèse opened her Bible for comfort, but the pages had changed. Every reference to angel had been blotted out with ink. Every depiction, every word, gone, except one sentence, scrawled in the margin in handwriting that was not hers. They were never sent to protect you, only to watch what crawls out. Episode 8. The novice who heard her name whispered from under the floor. It happened in the 5th hour of silence. Every Wednesday, the convent observed a ritual of wordlessness, no speech, no song, no footfall louder than breath. It was meant to draw the soul inward, toward purity. But for Sister Thérèse, silence had become a curse, because now, in the quiet, she heard things she was never meant to. That day, as she swept the hallway outside the forbidden door, the air grew still, not peaceful, expectant, the kind of stillness that comes before a question no one wants answered. She paused, letting the broom rest against the wall, and then she heard it, her name, spoken softly, from beneath the stone floor. Theirs. It wasn't imagined. The voice was hers. Not just similar, identical. Tone, breath, the tremble at the end of the last syllable, as though she had just woken from a dream she couldn't remember. She backed away. It followed. Theirs. Don't leave me down here. She dropped to her knees, pressed her ear to the cold floor, and the stone breathed. She could hear it now, not just her name, but her thoughts, echoing back to her in broken fragments. Old fears, regrets, doubts she had buried so deeply they no longer had words. But the floor remembered. It always remembered. She stood, dizzy, turned to leave, but her feet would not move. Something was pulling not her body, but her memory, drawing her closer to the door. Not the forbidden one, the one beside it, a smaller, unmarked, never mentioned, a storage room, supposedly. She opened it. Inside, nothing but dust and an old wooden table, but the stone there was different. No cracks, no dust, no aging, just a single square tile, smoother than the rest, almost polished. She knelt beside it, and the whisper returned louder now. You prayed here before, the voice said. Before your mouth was born. She reached out and touched the tile, and instantly, darkness. Her vision went black, but not unconscious. She was somewhere, a narrow chamber, walls slick with something that wasn't water, and across from her, on the other side of a small gap in the stone, herself, kneeling, mouth sewn shut, eyes wide open. The stitched version of her leaned forward and pressed its head to the floor, then mouthed the words, "Let me speak again." Thérèse gasped, tearing her hand away from the stone. She was back in the convent, back in the room, but her palm, where it had touched the tile, was now covered in black ash, and across the center of her hand, etched like frost, a spiral, with her name written backwards inside it. That night, as she lay in bed, her lips moved involuntarily in the dark, and from beneath the floorboards, her own voice whispered back, "I'm almost out." Episode 9. The Bible that refused to be opened. It was bound in calfskin and locked behind glass, the oldest Bible in the convent, older than the convent itself. They said it had been passed down from the monastery that once stood on this land, long before the sisters came. No one read from it anymore, not because it was too sacred, but because every time someone tried, it refused. Sister Thérèse had seen it only once before on the day she took her novice vows. She remembered how the abbot had touched the cover with trembling fingers, muttered a Latin phrase under his breath, and moved on without opening it. No one questioned why. The Bible was more relic than scripture now, a symbol, but that changed the day she heard her name from beneath the floor. She couldn't pray, couldn't sleep, couldn't silence the voice that now echoed in her bones. The stitched version of herself haunted every corner of her reflection. Something wanted out, and something told her the answer was in that Bible. She found it in the archive room, encased in its glass box, wrapped in silence and shadow. Sister Agnes caught her staring at it and asked, "Why this one?" Thérèse didn't answer. She didn't know how, only that her palm, still marked with the backward spiral, burned the closer she stood to it. Agnes hesitated, then slowly, with a rusted iron key, unlocked the case. No one's opened it in nearly a century. She whispered, "But if you're going to try, do it before midnight." Thérèse asked why. Agnes simply replied, "Because that's when the ink begins to move." She lifted the Bible with both hands. It was heavier than she expected, warm, like a sleeping thing. She set it on the table, ran her fingers over the cover. No title, no cross, just skin. She opened the front clasp, and the book resisted. Not jammed, not broken, just alive. The leather pulled back. The first page, the one that should have begun with "in the beginning was the Word," was gone. Not torn, not missing, erased. Only a single sentence remained in faint gray ink. There was no beginning, only the forgetting. She turned the next page. It was blank. The next, blank. Page after page, empty. Hundreds, until the very center, where a passage appeared, not written in scripture, but scratched into the parchment like claw marks. What was buried was not sin, it was voice, and she remembers it. Beneath the writing, a single word had been pressed so deep into the page it bled through the next 5. Speak. The candles in the room dimmed, the glass box behind her shattered, and then The Bible turned a page by itself. A new passage revealed, still warm, still wet with ink. It read, "If you open your mouth, she will come through it." Thérèse slammed the book shut, but her lips were already moving, not by choice, by invitation, and from her throat came a voice not her own. "I am not her shadow. I am her first sound. I am the room that remembers what age." Episode 10. The feather that was burned by nothing. It drifted down like snow, slow, deliberate, weightless. But it was not snow. It was a feather, pale as moonlight, unstained, untouched, and somehow glowing from within. They found it lying on the chapel floor, directly beneath the mural of the Archangel Michael, whose painted wings stretched across the ceiling like blades of fire. But one wing in the mural, the left, had darkened overnight, a soot-like smear across the paint, as if even the image of divinity had tried to flee. Sister Agnes was the first to kneel beside the feather. She didn't speak, she didn't dare, but she crossed herself 3 times, faster with each motion. "It's not one of ours," she whispered. "No goose, no dove. This is not from earth." She reached out, and the moment her finger grazed it, the feather ignited. No spark, no flame, just sudden, complete combustion. It burned without fire. It made no sound. It left behind no smoke, just a blackened scorch mark on the marble. In the shape of a spiral, Sister Thérèse was summoned. She stared at the ashes in silence. Something inside her recognized it, not the feather, but the burn it left behind. She had seen that same spiral etched into her hand weeks ago, and in the Bible that had turned its pages, and now branded into the house of God itself. That night, she dreamed of wings, but they weren't flying, they were dragging. Feathers heavy, soaked, stuck to skin that wasn't hers. She knelt in her dream before a great wall of stone. There was no sky, only weight, only sound, whispers, and one sentence that echoed behind her eyelids as she woke up sweating. The wind that touched the door no longer belongs to heaven. She returned to the mural. Now the feathers had fallen, one under each wing. One burned immediately, the other she caught in her palm before it touched the floor. It was cold, not lifeless, but numb, like it had forgotten what warmth was. And when she held it close to her chest, it trembled, almost afraid. Later that evening, when she passed the east hallway, the one with the forbidden door, the feather pulsed in her pocket. She stopped. The door breathed, and for the first time, she noticed something new carved just above the handle, faint and barely visible. She wore wings once, but they couldn't carry what she carried. Suddenly, the feather shriveled in her hand, blackened, smoked from within, and then, in one final twitch of unnatural movement, it turned to ash midair before even falling. In its place, a voice whispered from inside her chest, "Don't call it falling." She descended willingly. Episode 11. The cross that screamed at midnight. It was meant to protect the hallway. An old crucifix, carved by hand centuries ago, hung just outside the forbidden door, a final line of defense. As if wooden faith could contain what waited behind the walls. They had placed it there during the winter of 1892. After the first incident, the journals called it the year of withering silence. No details, only one line repeated over and over in the margins. Let the cross face the door. Let it carry the scream for us. For decades, the crucifix had remained quiet, untouched, unmoving, until now. It began with a hum, low, constant, vibrating through the stone, through the air, through the bones of anyone who passed it close. The sisters thought it was in their heads, thought it was exhaustion, stress, doubt. But at midnight, on the 13th night of Sister Thérèse's silence, the crucifix screamed. It didn't creak, it didn't fall, it howled, a sound no wooden object should make, a sound no throat, human or holy, was built to carry, sharp, endless, piercing the soul like nails into light. The chapel bells rang themselves, the walls trembled, and all the candles in the convent bent away from the door at once, their flames retreating like hunted animals. Sister Agnes collapsed. Julian, the boy, bled from the nose without touching anything. And Thérèse, she didn't flinch. She walked toward it. The crucifix shook on the wall as she approached. The scream still building, twisting, not volume, layers, as if 10,000 voices were buried beneath the wood, shouting over one another. Christ's figure began to blacken. First the hands, then the eyes, then the mouth, which opened wider than any carving should allow. And from the tiny wooden mouth came one word: return. They stepped forward, touched the foot of the crucifix. It went silent, just like that. No echo, no aftershock, just an emptiness so thick it made her stomach turn. She leaned close to the figure's ear, whispered, "She's already coming." The eyes of the figure cracked. Stone dust fell, and then, impossibly, the nails in the wooden hands began to twist, not out, and, as if something inside the cross wanted to stay nailed, or worse, feared what would happen if it wasn't. That night, the scream echoed in every room of the convent, not aloud in the dreams of every sister. Some heard their own names. Others heard a child crying in a language no one remembered. Only Thérèse woke smiling, because in her dream, she was holding the hammer, and the one on the cross wasn't him. Episode 12. The angel who refused to speak her name. The invocation was never meant to be spoken aloud. It was hidden on page 237 of a banned catechism, written in ink that faded when read in daylight, but reappeared under candlelight. Sister Thérèse found it buried beneath the chapel floor, unearthed, when the cracks in the forbidden hallway reached the altar. It was not a prayer, it was a summons, and it began with a warning: if the angels still remember you, they will descend, but if they do not, they will watch, and they will mourn. She spoke the invocation anyway, not out of defiance, but because the silence inside her had grown unbearable. No voice, no prayer, no God, only the stitched echo of her name, whispered from the floorboards and burned into the mirror glass. She lit the final blue candle. Kneeling between the chapel pews, she recited the words written in disappearing ink, syllables that left her mouth tasting of iron and smoke. The wind died, the flame frowncy, and the angel appeared, not with wings, not with trumpets, just light, a body carved from the memory of fire, eyes like open wounds, and behind it, a shadow not cast by its body, but by something higher, standing just out of reach. The sisters who saw it collapsed. Some sobbed, some vomited, one screamed until her heart stopped. Sister Thérèse stood and asked the only question she cared about: "What is my name?" The angel looked at her. It opened its mouth slowly, reverently, as if preparing to speak a word sacred enough to unravel heaven itself. And then, it stopped. Its mouth closed. Its wings made of light and pages and dust folded in, and it turned away. No angel in the text had ever turned away from a direct question. Not even Lucifer, but this one did. And in its silence, Thérèse understood. Her name was no longer in their memory. The angel raised one hand and pointed not at her, but at the forbidden door, and written across its chest, in glowing, shifting letters only she could read, was a message that bled through the air like heat. She who holds the name now belongs to the room, and the room remembers before creation. As the angel vanished, the wind returned, not from the world above, but from beneath the floor, a gust that carried the scent of earth, blood, and birth. And along the walls of the convent, all the crucifixes turned again, this time upside down, not violently, but gently, as if nodding in agreement. And the mirror and the archive shattered, not from pressure, but because her reflection left. That night, Thérèse stood in front of the forbidden door. She placed her palm against it, and from the other side, in a voice made of her own breath twisted backwards, she heard it speak: "You no longer carry the name of the living. Now, carry the key." Episode 13. The room began to pray on its own. They first heard it during lauds, just past dawn, as the sisters gathered in the chapel, bleary-eyed and barefoot, ready to chant their morning psalms. The notes hung uncertain in the air, like even the hymns weren't sure they should rise that morning. Then came a whisper, not from the pews, not from the rafters, from the east hallway, from behind the forbidden door. It began as murmuring, soft, rhythmic, like wind through a cracked window. But there was no wind that morning. The convent was sealed, and yet the sound grew louder. A voice, then two, then many, not speaking, but praying. The sisters fell silent. One by one, the strongest among them began to weep. Others dropped to their knees as if dragged, because the words behind that door weren't in Latin, weren't even in a language known by man, but each of them understood exactly what was being said. It was a prayer. Yes, but not for mercy, not for salvation. It was gratitude. She is ready. The key is breathing. The seal has thinned. Sister Thérèse didn't cry. She walked toward the sound with her eyes wide open, her mouth slightly ajar, not in fear, but in recognition, because the voice leading the prayer, it was hers, but not from now. It was the voice of her as a child, of her as an old woman, of her as something that had never been born, but had always waited. She pressed her ear to the door, and heard it, not words, a heartbeat, a low, loud, echoing as if the walls themselves had arteries. Thump, thump. With each beat, the spiral carved into her hand began to pulse, glowing faintly with a black light that did not illuminate, only revealed. Inside her head, the prayers continued, but now she could hear names being spoken, not hers, theirs. Every sister who had entered the convent in the last 7 generations, one by one, called not in mourning, but in reclamation. That night, the walls of the convent began to exhale. You could see it, the stone swelling slightly, as if the building itself had lungs. A few paintings fell from their hooks. The statue of Saint Cecilia cracked at the neck and fell face down. Her marble eyes shattered across the floor, but the prayers behind the door never stopped. If anything, they intensified, like a congregation that didn't need breath, didn't need bodies, only a memory and a mouth. At midnight, the door wound seed, a clear liquid, not blood, not oil, something in between, and written across the floor in it was a single line. We no longer need a priest. We have a voice now. Thérèse stood before it and whispered, Amen. Episode 14. She was never a nun. She was a seal. They were never supposed to look into her records, but Sister Agnes did, not out of suspicion, out of desperation. After 13 nights of backwards prayers, melting crucifixes, and voices rising from beneath the floor, she could no longer convince herself that Thérèse was merely a novice. So she searched in the convent's archives, in the diocese registry, in the Vatican's forgotten catalog of names marked inconclusive. There was no birth certificate, no baptismal record, no record of entrance into the novitiate. Only one handwritten note, dated 19 years ago, signed by a cardinal who had vanished. It read, placed under the guardianship of Saint Iradius Convent. Do not teach her Latin. Do not let her pray unsupervised. She is not a sister. She is a seal. Sister Agnes collapsed before she could finish reading. She wept, but not for Thérèse. She wept for the door, because if Thérèse was a seal, then someone had already turned the key. Back in the east hallway, Thérèse stood before the door with eyes not her own. She no longer blinked. She no longer slept. And when she breathed, the walls breathed with her. She didn't speak, but the spiral on her palm now, black and raised like a brand, began to rotate ever so slightly, not metaphorically, literally, as if the skin remembered movement from a time before bone. In her cell, the mirror remained shattered, but her reflection fractured, stitched, bleeding, still looked back at her from each shard, and each shard whispered a different name, not her name, names older than Eve, names buried by choirs, names scratched off every sacred text in the Dead Sea caves. That night, she walked barefoot into the chapel. The other sisters rose instinctively, eyes glazed, mouths open, not in song, but in obedience. She walked past them, into the sanctuary, where the altar once stood. A pool of ink now shimmered on the floor. In its reflection, she did not see the chapel. She saw a gate, made of ribs, lined with teeth, and pulsing with light that had never touched a star. She whispered, You kept me asleep long enough. The floor cracked, and beneath it, a heartbeat answered, but not hers. The room's. Sister Agnes burst in just as Thérèse reached the threshold, tears in her eyes, blood on her hands. Please, she begged, you don't have to do this. Thérèse turned to her and smiled, sweet, serene, as if they were still in the dining hall, sipping watered-down wine and reciting hymns. They, she said, I already did. The door behind her groaned, not from pressure, from relief. It opened half an inch, just enough to let the name out. Episode 15 finale, the day the room asked to be opened. It began with a knocking, not from outside, not even from inside, but from the door itself, like a heart, thudding against wood, a steady, deliberate rhythm, one beat every 3 seconds. each one softer than the last, each one asking, "Are you listening now?" By morning, the convent was empty. No, not empty, abandoned. The sisters had fled in silence, led by Sister Agnes through the cemetery gate, clutching nothing but their rosaries and pages torn from books they no longer trusted. Only Thérèse remained, not hiding, not possessed, but waiting. She stood before the door barefoot, her hands open at her sides, spiral on her palm now glowing a dull gold, pulsing with every knock. The hallway walls had darkened, not from soot, not from rot, but from memory. The stone remembered what it had once held, and what it was about to let go. The door whispered, "You were never meant to keep me closed. You were meant to become the word that unlocks." Thérèse blinked slowly. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, from recognition. She spoke the final phrase, not aloud, through breath, a word without syllables, a name without language, and the door opened. No hinges creaked, no wind stirred, no darkness spilled, just light, but not holy, not warm, a light that moved like water, that hissed like teeth, that pulled the air around it inward, like the world was holding its breath. Inside the room was nothing, and inside the nothing, a crib, old, carved from a tree no longer remembered, and inside it, something that looked like a child, but wasn't. It had no face, no limbs, just the shape of promise, and the sound of a prayer being whispered backward from the mouth of time itself. Thérèse stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, the door vanished behind her, not closed, gone, like it had never been there, like the room had only ever been a mouth waiting for a tongue. She knelt before the crib, and the prayer stopped, because it had found her. Far below the convent, in vaults forgotten by men, old bells began to ring, not from ropes, but from blood, and on every abandoned wall of St. Herodias, the same sentence appeared, carved from within. The seal has become the voice. The voice has remembered the name, and the name is ready to speak. There is no convent now, only a silence that breathes. And in the place where the forbidden door once stood, new stone has grown, smooth, unbroken. But if you press your ear against it, you'll hear a woman inside, still praying, still whispering, "Amen."